The fashion world's biggest night is underway right now, as some of the world's biggest names in entertainment and culture attend the Met Gala. But this year's event has been overshadowed by the presence of Jeff Bezos and his wife, Lauren Sanchez Bezos. They are serving as the honorary chairs of the event, and it is not going over very well. The New York Times reports this, quote, opposition to the Bezoses started almost immediately after they were announced as financial sponsors in February. It comes amid a surging anti-rich sentiment nationwide and in New York City. In the weeks leading up to the event, the streets of New York City have been peppered with protests of Bezos and their presence at the gala, calling for a boycott of the Bezos Met Gala. And it might have to do with Bezos making capitulation look like an art form during Donald Trump's second term in office. Jeff Bezos donated $1 million to Donald Trump's inauguration, which earned him a prominent seat on the stage during the inauguration ceremony. And his company, Amazon, spent $40 million making Melania Trump's self-titled documentary. With the Wall Street Journal reporting, the company paid 3 times more than the next highest bidder in what was essentially a gift. The backlash to Bezos and his wife at tonight's gala is just another reminder of how Donald Trump's deeply unpopular presidency is now starting to stain the brands of those who have cowered and capitulated to him since he took office. I want to bring in domestic correspondent for the style section of the New York Times, Jesse McKinley, whose byline on that Times reporting we read from, and with me at the table, political analyst Molly Jong-Fast. She's the host of Fast Politics and a New York Times contributing opinion writer. I guess I want to understand, Jesse, how this came to be. So is it all about money? Is the Met Gala for sale?
Well, that's probably a little too simplistic, but the short answer is sort of yes. I mean, Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sanchez Bezos probably contributed somewhere in the neighborhood of $10 million, low 8 figures, in order to become the hosts and sponsors of this event tonight. And that event, the Met Gala, is at its heart a fundraiser. You know, the money goes to the Costume Institute, which is this subsection of the Met itself devoted to fashion. And for many, many decades, I mean, this dates back to the 1940s, this was kind of a clubby Upper East Side kind of event. You know, you'd have patrons of the arts and philanthropists and what have you. But over the last 10, 15, 20 years, when Anna Wintour basically took over the event, it's become this global A-list celebrity event. And more, you see big money. You see people like Mark Zuckerberg, who's going to be there tonight, apparently, buying their way into these events, not by dint of, a special, interest in fashion necessarily, but by dint of being, an exceptional person in a world that seems to kind of value financial success.
Jesse, the New York Times reports this. On Friday, in a nod to complaints by Amazon workers of having to skip bathroom breaks and urinate in bottles instead, the group placed close to 300 bottles of fake urine inside the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Then on Sunday, the eve of the gala, the anti-billionaire group projected video interviews with Amazon workers onto the Empire State Building, the Chrysler Building, and the Bezos' penthouse near Madison Square Park. I mean, you and your colleagues have sort of reported on the front-end backlash. What is the lasting brand damage to this embrace of Bezos and his wife, Lauren Sanchez?
That's going to be an interesting thing to delve into. I mean, one of the things we'll be looking at tonight is if not only who shows up, but who doesn't show up. There have been reports that some celebrities like Zendaya, et cetera, are not going to be there tonight. Bella Hadid apparently is not going to show up. These are people that kind of add a certain luster and brand to this event. I mean, that being said, you still have Nicole Kidman, you have Venus Williams, you have Anna Wintour herself already on the carpet, you have Lauren Sanchez on the carpet. But there will be questions either at the event tonight or in the after parties or in the days to come, whether or not people, basically got the ick factor of being there with Jeff Bezos, who, has really drifted to the right politically with the inaugural that you mentioned in the intro, as well as, some of the cutbacks of the Washington Post, some of the editorial decisions he's made at the Washington Post, which he owns. I think all of that has given some liberals pause. Most primarily Mayor Mamdani, who said a month ago that he would not go to this event. As a Democratic Socialist, that's not a big surprise. But I think that was a real signal to people that this was not a place that good liberals should go.
I think the risk is broader than among liberals. I mean, I think Jeff Bezos has staked out a position that is anti-democratic.
Yes.
And I don't know how quickly an Orban-like fall of Trumpism is going to come, but it's coming, and Bezos is on the wrong side of that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there will be a time sooner rather than later that Jeff Bezos pretends he was never for any of this. But he is pretty much a case study in obeying in advance. And for example, I'm just going to tick off some of the things that my man did here. We had the Melania movie. Remember that? He's toying with an Apprentice show with Don Jr., front row at the inauguration with the wife. This guy he's a case study in obeying in advance. And he's also been, I mean, there are many reasons. Look, I come from a world, I grew up in the city, you know, the Nobel Oblege,
yeah,
you know, where
an
people,
elegance,
right,
yeah.
well, and also people who had means used those means to take care of the community. That was part of the deal. And you had, you know, even in the Gilded Ages, you had people building museums, and you know, that was the kind of the job. This crew of these tech bros, they are not so interested in
They're
that.
not building anything.
Right. And you see that they have foundations that, you know, don't give enough money away to get the tax statuses they're supposed to have. And look, this is an administration filled with that. Remember, it started with the richest man in the world saying that he was going to cut cut all sorts of NIH grants and stuff like that so that he could end waste, fraud, and abuse. And of course, that was never really true. And he's, you know, no longer in the government. But it was just, you know, to look at this and to see this as anything but really anti-democratic and also just morally bankrupt in a moment when the American people are really hurting, when affordability is like number one for, you know, Republicans, Democrats, gas prices are high, and we're looking, you know, and we're watching this just grotesque show of wealth. And it's just, I think it's morally really dicey.